Nations Verification Mission in Colombia described the national strike as a movement of unprecedented social unrest and warned about the increase in the killings of former combatants and community leaders. The World Health Organization warns that the COVID-19 Delta strain adds extra urgency to the need to immunize the entire world population. Transnational corporations will have to pay a flat 15% tax on profit everywhere they operate, regardless of physical presence in the country, following an agreement brokered by member states of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. From the headquarters of teleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is from the South, I'm Katrina Goss. The United Nations Verification Mission in Colombia described the national strike as a movement of unprecedented social unrest and warned about the increase in the killings of former combatants and community leaders. A report prepared by the organisation, which covers the months of April, May and June, will be submitted on July 13th to the UN Security Council. It describes the impact of the demonstrations in the context of the national strike. Researchers have been able to document the death of 54 civilians and 2 police officers during these protests. Hundreds have been injured. The same report also analyses the situation of former combatants and emphasises that in the period in question, 49 social leaders and human rights defenders were murdered. As of Friday morning, Storm Elsa gained hurricane category to become the first of this season. Western Caribbean nations launched hurricane preparedness measures. Elsa blew roofs off homes, cut power, toppled trees and sparked flooding in the island nation of Barbados on Friday. Emergency services were unable to reach people, but there were no reports of injuries or deaths. The Category 1 storm also unleashed heavy rains and winds on St Vincent and the Grenadines, which are struggling to recover from recent massive volcanic eruptions. A hurricane warning was in effect for St Lucia, St Vincent and the Grenadines, as well as southern Haiti, from the capital, Port-au-Prince, to the southern border with the Dominican Republic. In Cuba, eastern provinces are on alert as the hurricane is expected to pass over much of the island if it follows the forecast path. In the meantime, in Grenada, the National Water and Sewerage Authority has continued to monitor the path of Hurricane Elsa currently affecting the country. At present, the current weather conditions are impacting on water supply systems. Authorities stress that efforts are being made to restore the systems as soon as possible to facilitate distribution, while calling on the population to take measures to ensure they have emergency water supplies, even through the collection of rainwater. The island remains under a tropical storm watch. Brazilian prosecutors on Friday opened a probe into allegations that President Jair Bolsonaro sat on evidence of corruption in a COVID vaccine deal to purchase the Indian-made Covaxin. The Attorney General's office, headed by Bolsonaro allies, was compelled to act by the nation's High Court. It announced on Friday an investigation into events reported by 3 senators who formally accused the president of malfeasance. While adding to the pressure on the far-right president, it seems unlikely that he'll be removed from office anytime soon. Even if investigators find evidence of wrongdoing, the Supreme Court can only open a case against Bolsonaro with approval of Congress, where he holds sway and has overcome many impeachment attempts. The Senate Commission looking into the government's handling of the pandemic was told last week that a deal to purchase the Covaxin vaccine was a front to embezzle millions of dollars, masterminded by a Bolsonaro ally, and that the president knew all about it. Monuments devoted to British royalty are being toppled in Canada. This is one obvious repercussion of the overwhelming evidence of systematic ethnic cleansing of Indigenous children at forced assimilation schools. This was the monument honouring Queen Victoria in Manitoba, Canada, one of her dominions as Queen of England for 63 years, from 1837 until 1901. It was toppled on Canada Day, July 1st. As has been happening all over the American continent, people are revising what they've been told about discoveries, colonisation, culture and Indigenous peoples. The finding of hundreds of remains of children murdered at forced assimilation schools sparked outrage, also among young Canadians, told to believe their country was different from its southern neighbour, the United States. Yet the Queen of England is still, up to this day, the head of state of Canada. In Venezuela, face-to-face classes are set to resume in October. The news was announced during the closing ceremony of the Bicentennial Congress of the Venezuelan Federation of University and High School Students on Thursday. The event, which was presided over by President Nicolas Maduro and saw the participation of representatives of the different educational areas and institutions of the country, included an account of the proposals developed during the Congress regarding transportation, canteens, scholarships and students' residencies. Maduro informed that in October, with all the biosecurity measures in place, educational activities will be resumed throughout the country. In addition, a pilot plan was announced to collect student travel fares through the Homeland system in 9 states of the country. And we'll be right back after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. The COVID-19 Delta strain adds extra urgency to the need to immunise the entire world population, the World Health Organization's head, Tedros Ghebreyesus, stressed Friday in Geneva.
We're in a very dangerous period of this pandemic. In those countries with low vaccination coverage, terrible scenes of hospitals overflowing are again becoming the norm. But no country on earth is out of the woods yet. The Delta variant is dangerous and is continuing to evolve and mutate, which requires constant evaluation and careful adjustment of the public health response. I have urged leaders across the world to work together to ensure that by this time next year, 70% of all people in every country are vaccinated. This is the best way to slow the pandemic, save lives, drive a truly global economic recovery, and along the way, prevent further dangerous variants from getting the upper hand.
On Friday, the Argentine state airline's first flight to China departed from Buenos Aires to pick up the first batch of 8 million doses of the COVID-19 vaccine produced by China's Sinopharm company. The batch is the first of 24 million doses purchased by Argentina from the China National Pharmaceutical Group to be delivered through mid-July. As part of the operations aimed at boosting the government's vaccination campaign with several jabs, doses of the Pfizer vaccine will also be supplied. Meanwhile, Argentina and Russia agreed to jointly manufacture the Sputnik V vaccine, which in Argentina will be called Sputnik Vida or Life. Some 20 of the country's 45 million inhabitants have been inoculated with either 1 or 2 doses. Careful in following all procedures, Cuban vaccine developers have been cautious, even in terms of how they denominate their jabs. They call them vaccine candidates, but that will soon change. There'll be full-fledged vaccines once their emergency use for immunisation is authorised by the state regulatory body, which is expected to happen any moment now. 2 of the 5 jabs under development have passed all 3 clinical trial phases internationally required for vaccines. One of them, Abdallah, has shown efficacy of 92.28%. The other, Soberana or Sovereign 2, registered 62% efficacy with 2 of its 3 doses. In line with the ethical principles of the Cuban Revolution, vaccines will be made available to fellow developing countries under fair conditions.
The serious problem we have had, and we continue to have in our region, is precisely the availability of vaccines. All our countries have started to vaccinate, but we are going slowly because, of course, we depend on this valuable input.
Just like everything Cuba does, just like it sends doctors on missions, this vaccine is going to be useful for all the countries that are poor, that are less...
United States President Joe Biden is considering lifting the sanctions former President Donald Trump imposed on Cuba, according to a top National Security Council official. That's what Juan Gonzalez, head for the Western Hemisphere at the U.S. National Security Council, said when interviewed by CNN. The measure would include re-allowing money remittances to Cuba, as well as travel between the island and the United States. However, other economic, financial and trade sanctions would remain in place, continuing a blockade established some 60 years ago in order to make the Cuban people surrender by means of starvation and disease. The United Nations General Assembly condemned such practices last month by a majority of 184 to 2. Hundreds of aid workers in Syria staged demonstrations on Friday, calling for an extension of a United Nations resolution to avoid the closure of the last lifeline cross-border point with Turkey. The Bab al-Hawa on the frontier with Turkey is the last of 4 crossing points that remains open and is set to close on July 10th. According to the UN officials, the cross-border operations ensure basic goods for 2.4 million people, including food. The majority of the vulnerable recipients of the aid are women and children, many of whom have suffered violence more than once.
We as humanitarian workers in northern Syria organized a human chain of more than 3 kilometers near the Bab al-Hawa border crossing to call for the extension of a UN resolution allowing the entry of aid through the Bab al-Hawa crossing for those living in camps in northern Syria. There are more than 1.8 million people who benefit from food baskets and 2.3 million who benefit from drinking water, shelters, wash, drinking water sanitation and hygiene, and medical projects, especially amid the coronavirus.
The Syrian people are the victims of an acute economic crisis caused by the terrorist war and the blockade imposed by the United States and its European allies. This situation is being exploited by Washington to carry out its plans against Syria, as condemned by the government and citizens of the Arab nation. We have more details in the following report from our correspondent Hisham Wanas.
Commitment to work, solidarity, dignity, determination and devotion to life and the homeland define the daily efforts of the government and citizens of Syria in the face of a scenario marked by inflation, rising prices, lack of electricity, shortages of fuel, medicines and other basic needs. A difficult situation that Syrians agree is the result of the blockade imposed by Washington to generate popular unrest as a means to push the population into uprising against their government, an attempt to achieve what they have failed to do through the use of terrorism, military intervention and the occupation during the last 10 years of terrorist war imposed on the Arab nation.
The prices of products are very high, as incomes are a limit and not enough to purchase basic goods. Likewise, Syrian citizens suffer from the lack of fuel for heating, transportation and electricity generation, and all this is the result of the blockade imposed by many countries on Syria. But even so, we are confident that the situation will improve and we will advance. Little by little, we can overcome the crisis because during the war, the situation was catastrophic and we have managed to triumph. And now, with work, dedication and solidarity, we can overcome the effects of the blockade and frustrate the evil plans of the United States.
At the same time, Syrians denounce that the United States is using the difficult humanitarian situation as a source of pressure on the United Nations and its Security Council to approve a draft resolution to extend the mechanism for cross-border traffic approved in 2014 for 1 more year, which expires on July the 10th of this year. A mechanism that Russia and China, as well as Syria, stress serves to bring into Syrian soil, without the supervision of Damascus, military and logistical supplies for terrorist groups under the pretext of humanitarian assistance for the Syrian people.
Syria's allies are opposed to the approval of this resolution by the Security Council, so we are confident that pressure from the United States will not be effective, as our allies will defend the sovereignty of Syria, since in this diplomatic battle they are also defending their own sovereignty and their common interest with Syria.
Meanwhile, the official and popular joint efforts continue to overcome the economic crisis that is affecting the country. On Thursday, July the 1st, the Made in Syria Shopping Festival inaugurated its 119th edition in Damascus as part of this effort, an event that seeks to counteract the negative effects of the Western blockade by providing a platform to promote national production and to bring products directly to consumers at affordable prices, without intermediaries, one of many signs of Syria's determination to push ahead in the face of the economic war unleashed by Washington and its allies.
Hisham Wanas, teleSUR, Damascus, Syria.
And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. Transnational corporations will have to pay a flat 15% tax on profit everywhere they operate, regardless of physical presence in the country, following an agreement brokered by member states of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. The initiative came from the United States, seeking to collect revenues from its own corporations, most of which have fixed residency in tax haven countries. Amazon and Google were given as examples of multinationals making tax-free profits all over the world. 130 countries supported the agreement, Matthias Cormann, Secretary General of the OECD, said. It's estimated that this tax will represent annual revenues totaling some $150 billion. The United States has put Turkey on a list of countries suspected of using child soldiers. The country is the first and only North Atlantic Treaty Organization ally to be included in the group. Washington has been long complaining of Turkey's arms purchases from Russia, threatening it with sanctions. Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan accused the US of being behind a failed military coup in 2016. The US State Department determined in its 2021 trafficking in persons list that Turkey was providing support to the Sultan Murad division in Syria, a group that has allegedly recruited child soldiers. Countries put on the State Department's list could face regulations on security and the commercial licensing of military equipment, but the State Department has not said whether or not Turkey will be restricted. In Eswatini, a small landlocked kingdom surrounded by South Africa and Mozambique, people seem to be fed up with an autocratic monarchy. King Swati called in the army to suppress protests. Police have been firing tear gas, gunshots and intimidating with low-altitude helicopter flights. Most of Eswatini's 1.3 million inhabitants are subsistence farmers. The country is one of the world's poorest, but they're forced to pay for the king's luxuries, among them 11 palaces for his 15 wives and over 100 children. He recently bought 19 Rolls-Royce and 120 BMW luxury cars for his wives and children. Formerly known as Swaziland, the country lies between South Africa and Mozambique on southern East Africa. Most of its population is ethnic Swazi, with a 10% Zulu minority. In occupied Palestine, hundreds gathered outside the illegal Israeli Evyatta settlement in the West Bank, demanding the implementation of an agreement to vacate the area. On Friday, the settlers had not yet left Evyatta, near the Palestinian city of Nablus, where they're under protection by Israeli troops. Prime Minister Naftali Bennett had reached an agreement with them for a temporary relocation. A group of Jewish families placed trailers and tents in the field, claiming it as their own. Israel's Minister of Defense is evaluating the declaration of Evyatta as state land, which would allow the settlers to establish there permanently. The area is part of the West Bank, Palestinian land occupied by Israel in 1967. Eastern Jerusalem neighborhood of Silwan, Israeli security forces attacked Palestinian demonstrators following noon Muslim Friday prayers. Silwan is the latest target of Israeli demolition of Palestinian homes to make way for Jewish settlers.
We performed Friday prayers in the Al-Bustan neighborhood, sitting in tent in order to send our voice to everyone that we reject all measures of the occupation municipality against us and the Israeli occupation government, including demolishing homes, displacing the residents of the Batan al-Hawa neighborhood, and all plans related to the entire town of Silwan.
In the Philippines, thousands of people have been evacuated from villages around Taal volcano near the capital, Manila. Officials now face another dilemma of ensuring emergency shelters, such as school buildings, basketball gyms and even church grounds, do not become epicenters of COVID-19 infection. The alert was raised to 3 on a 5-level scale after Taal volcano blasted a dark grey plume into the sky late Thursday. According to the Philippine Institute of Volcanology and Seismology, a level 3 means lava is near or at the surface and activity could lead to hazardous eruption in weeks. An eruption of Taal last year displaced hundreds of thousands of people and briefly closed Manila's international airport.
We are nervous to go to evacuation center, especially with what is happening. There's a pandemic and it's hard to leave the house. There are a lot of people there and we do not know everyone.
And we've come to the end of this news brief, but remember you can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also follow us on social media for all the latest news. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and Telegram. Plus you can catch up on our shows on our YouTube channel. For teleSUR English, I'm Katrina Goss. Thank you for watching.